The yard smelled of dust and old iron, the kind that settled into the lungs and stayed there. Evening leaned low over the town, turning the sky the color of a bruise just beginning to heal. Eliza May Holloway stood near the fence with her shawl pulled tight, one hand resting where her belly curved beneath the worn fabric. The wind worried at her skirts, lifting grit into her eyes, but she did not blink it away. She had learned not to flinch. Not here. Not anymore. Men stood on the other side of the rail, boots planted wide, voices sharp with opinion. A pregnant widow did not belong at a trader's yard, not one with no brother, no father, no man to stand between her and their stares. They said nothing to her face, but the silence spoke well enough. Shame had a sound. It was the way conversation dipped when she stepped closer, the way eyes slid away and then returned, heavier than before. At the center of the yard, old Fletcher cleared his throat and lifted his cane, tapping it against the dirt to call for attention. Behind him, a line of men stood. No, not stood. Some leaned, some swayed, some were held upright by rope looped beneath their arms. Soldiers, fresh or ruined or somewhere in between, brought west like broken tools after the war lost interest in them. Labor, Fletcher called it. Opportunity. Eliza called it something else. But she had no word gentle enough to say aloud. She wasn't meant to be here. She had come for flour, maybe salt, if the price was kind. But she'd followed the sound of voices, the clink of chains, the strange pull that tugged her feet where her sense said turn back. Now she stood still, heart thudding slow and heavy, as Fletcher pointed to the next man. This one's barely fit to lift a shovel, Fletcher said, voice thick with amusement. But he's breathing, and that counts for something, don't it? A few men chuckled. No, one stepped forward. The soldier's coat hung off him like it belonged to someone else. One leg was bound poorly, blood darkening the cloth, and his face, God, his face, was young and old all at once. Eyes too tired for the years they'd lived through. He swayed, caught himself, and whispered something Eliza couldn't hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a name. Any bids? Fletcher asked. Silence answered. The wind dragged a scrap of paper across the yard. Somewhere a crow laughed. Eliza felt her hand tighten over her belly, felt the child shift, alive and insistent. She thought of the night her husband had died, how the world had not stopped for her grief, how it had kept moving, indifferent and loud. She thought of cold mornings and empty chairs, and the way kindness had become rare as rain. $1, she said. The word surprised even her. Heads turned. Fletcher squinted. You speak up, widow? She nodded. Her voice did not shake. $1. That's all I have. A murmur rippled through the men. Mrs. Crowley's sharp laugh cut through it. Buying herself a man now, is she? Eliza did not look at her. She kept her eyes on Fletcher, on the paper in his hand, on the choice she had already made. Fletcher shrugged. $1 it is. No one else seems interested. The rope was loosened. The soldier sagged, nearly falling before Eliza stepped closer. She didn't touch him right away. She just stood there, letting him find his balance, letting the world see that this was not ownership. This was something else. His knees buckled. She caught him then, her shoulder under his arm, his weight heavier than she'd expected. He smelled of sweat and blood and old smoke. Easy, she murmured, not to him alone but to herself. They loaded him into her wagon as the sun slipped lower. Someone tossed the $1 back at her. But she shook her head. Keep it, she said. You've taken enough already. The road home was long and quiet. The wagon creaked with every rut, the sound steady as a heartbeat. The soldier lay on his side, breath shallow but even. Once he stirred and whispered, sorry, like an apology learned too young. For what? She asked. Bleeding, he said. She almost smiled. Would remembers worse things than blood. He went quiet after that. The moon rose pale and watchful, laying silver across the fields. Eliza drove with care, every jolt sending a small ache through her back. But she did not rush. Some things could not be hurried without breaking. Her cabin waited at the edge of the land, small but stubborn. She eased the wagon to a stop and sat for a moment, gathering herself. Then she went to him again, slow and steady, and together they made it inside. Lamplight softened the room. She cleaned his wound with water warmed over the fire, hands trembling until she forced him still. He flinched once, a sharp intake of breath, eyes gone distant. She did not ask where he'd gone. She hummed instead, low and gentle, a tune her husband had loved. It filled the space between them, smoothing the air. The soldier's eyes focused. "That song," he said faintly. "My husband used to hum it when he couldn't sleep," she replied. He nodded, as if filing the sound away somewhere deep. When she finished, she laid a clean bandage and stepped back. She left Soup by the bed, a blanket folded close enough to reach, but not touching him. Respect, she had learned, was a language of distance as much as closeness. Outside, the town did not rest. Words traveled faster than kindness ever had. By morning, Mrs. Crowley's version had already grown teeth. The sheriff came by, hat in hand, eyes apologetic. "People are talking, Eliza," he said. "They don't like what they don't understand." She met his gaze. "They never have." The soldier heard it all. The whispers when he limped outside. The looks that slid off him like he was already a ghost. Shame settled back into his bones. One evening, as Eliza stirred the pot by the fire, he spoke at last. "You said your husband's name once," he said softly. "Caleb." Her hand stilled. "Yes," he swallowed. "I knew a Caleb Holloway." The room seemed to tilt. "My husband was Caleb Holloway," she said. The silence that followed was heavy, sacred. The soldier bowed his head. "He was my brother." The truth spilled out then, halting and raw, an estrangement born of pride. A last letter never sent, news of death arriving too late. Eliza listened, tears sliding down without sound. Grief found new shape, but it did not overwhelm her. It folded itself into something like understanding. "I didn't know," he whispered. "If I had—" She reached out then, laid her hand over his. "We can't live our lives on what-ifs," she said. "Only on what we choose now." The town came for him a few days later, men emboldened by rumor and law twisted thin. Eliza stood in the doorway, calm as stone. "He's family," she said. The sheriff stepped forward, tore the paper in half, returned the dollar to her palm. "This was never right," he said. The men left grumbling. "Jonah." He told her his name then, sank to his knees, overcome. Eliza rested a hand on his shoulder. The child kicked, a small, fierce reminder of life's insistence. Time passed. Wounds closed. The cabin filled with quiet work and quieter joy. At sunset, 3 shadows stretched long across the ground, overlapping, inseparable. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it, the lesson carried on the wind. That worth is not measured by crowds. That grace arrives without ceremony. That sometimes the family you need is the one you choose to shelter. And in doing so, you save yourself too.